I think they're in it for the long term. Saudi Arabia is too big. There's too much money at stake. They're too important for the region. And they want to be important players in a range of areas: technology, transportation, tourism.
Right.
And so the opportunity is so big. I think they look beyond it. I think the companies right now are signaling.
But the companies may want to look beyond it. I want to know whether Saudi looks beyond it. I mean, you have to think about, and we've talked about this on the program, when Citigroup stepped out of the country back in, I think, 2003 or 4, after 9/11, after the lawsuits that were against that joint venture, it took them 14 years, basically, to get a license to do business back in that country. There are long memories there.
Absolutely. And loyalty is very important to the Saudis. But some of these players they're going to want back in room.
Right.
Their ambitions for 2030 are so great that they're going to need foreign participants and cooperation. So yes, some will be probably blackballed. They're working, these companies and investors are working very hard to signal privately that they're there for the long term. But for the near term, the optics aren't right, and they can't.
What should Steven Mnuchin do? Because he's the holdout at the moment.
That's right. I mean, maybe he shows up to an empty room. But clearly the Trump administration has signaled that they're with Saudi for the long term and look beyond the headlines right now.
Is that the right answer?
It's the political answer that the Trump administration wants to convey.
I know what they want to convey. I'm asking you what the right answer is.
Well, I think
because it's complicated, and I'm the first. I'm the first to suggest that we have a real interest, a national security interest, to having a relationship with this country, and at the same time, their leader clearly, it looks like, has done something quite disgraceful and terrible.
Yeah, that's,
and the question is, how do you deal with both of those same ideas at the same time?
We've done it in the past. We've certainly done it with regards to the war in Yemen. We've looked past it. We certainly looked past the jailing.
Looked past it or looked the other way?
Looked the other way and looked past it.
And made up stories and all of that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the current case with the journalist is that it's really gripped attention. And obviously the rumors and the stories coming out of Turkey are...
But will also require a legitimate lie, perhaps, to look past it.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. And that's the struggle that I think it's forcing everybody to really think about. What is Saudi Arabia? Who is the leadership? Who are we dealing with? And is this the real country? Is this the real leadership? Or is this something that's perhaps past?
Can I ask you a slightly, maybe even more provocative
Sure.
question? You just said that, and clearly we have national interest there, but you talked about the business in Saudi Arabia. Everyone talks about the transformation of the country by 2030.
Right.
You really look at the Public Investment Fund. Public Investment Fund at the moment actually has very little money.
Right.
Right. Everyone looks at it as some kind of grand honeypot that's coming. Mm-hmm. But it's not there yet. And that requires Aramco going public. And that requires a whole host of things happening. And it's possible that none of those things ultimately happen.
That's absolutely true.
Which would change the business calculus as well.
Yeah. People are so optimistic and hopeful at this point. We've been saying all along that this is a pie in the sky scenario, 2030, all of this investment. We've said from the beginning that Saudi Aramco privatization would be very fraught and probably unlikely. So yes, people are still wanted to show up in the desert this year. People are still optimistic. It suggests that perhaps people are not all eyes open.
Switch the conversation
Sure.
to China. Where do you think we really are in these trade and tariff negotiations?
We're at the beginning of a Cold War. All right. This reminds me of 1948 when the United States' view of the Soviet Union shift from ally to opponent. This is much bigger than trade, and this is about unfair competition. This is about the South China Sea. This is the growing Chinese Navy. This is embedding chips in our hardware. This is technology theft. There's a whole range of issues, strategic competition. We've seen it in consistent statements coming out of this administration over the last 18 months. The agenda has expanded much farther beyond trade, and it is about strategic competition.
With the Cold War, the original Cold War with the Russians, I would say that a shift in strategy in dealing with them was the appropriate way of going about things. You wouldn't expect to have a nice relationship and going along on all sides when you're trying to outflank each other on so many issues. Is this the right move with this relationship with the Chinese?
Well, first of all, we have a very deep trade and financial relationship with China that we didn't have with the Soviet Union, so we're having to adjust, right? And so that won't go away entirely, but we are having to recalibrate. The United States and its allies, the Europeans, are also thinking about how do they recalibrate, how do they relate to China over the long term. They want investment, they want engagement with China. China's certainly reaching out to the Europeans right now. But there's a growing perception that this is a broad threat.
We didn't have a supply chain built up in the
That's
USSR.
right.
What do we do about that?
Companies are going to have to adjust.
Does that mean rebuilding everything here?
It doesn't mean rebuilding everything. I think it means selective adjustment. Some is already being reshored to a limited extent, but it also means really other Asia.
Like
so a
looking to
much
other
more
countries.
diverse supply chains.